America first, second, and third. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show here today. It is Wednesday, May 8th, 2013. Getting into the middle of the week, hump day, middle of the week, starting that long, slow glide down to Pauhana Friday and another weekend. We've got a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. Manny is sitting in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, and ready to answer the phone when you call on in with your concerns and observations. Yesterday, a little bit of economic news right here at the top. The Dow Industrial Averages closed above 15,000 for the first time, and of course, everybody's out there throwing confetti and saying, yay, economy, and trying to act like this is the only thing you should be paying attention to in terms of the economy, which is why you should not. And as I've said many times before, when they start treating the stock market like it's a sports score, it's a sign to be worried about this situation. And remember, just before the big crash of 1929, the stock market set a record. Just in August of that same year. Huge record. And the financial writers were saying stocks are on a permanently high plateau, huzzah, 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 which of course turned out not to be the case. Now, getting on to the Syria situation, as you're probably aware, yesterday Syria literally vanished from the internet. Just completely gone, nothing in, nothing out. We were getting reports that cell phones, power and landlines were out in Damascus. Landlines were working in Homs. Some Syrians apparently have direct satellite links through which they can access the internet. They were getting some videos out regarding some shelling that was going on, all kinds of stuff. Syria's internet is now back connected to the rest of the world. Traffic is very, very slow. A lot of packet loss still going on. We're still waiting to hear exactly what was involved there. We know that Syria imprudently runs all of its internet connection to the rest of the world through a single building, the Syrian Telecommunications Ministry, and if something happened to that building, obviously would shut it all down. Maybe it was a hack attack. We're still waiting to find out what's going on about that. But the important thing to keep in mind is that all during this time that the Syrian internet was completely cut off from the rest of the world, over in Twitter and other social media, all of the pro-invasion, pro-FSA, oh, we want our country back, propaganda was still flowing unabated. What does that tell us? It tells us all this stuff claiming to be from Syria and please save us from the evil Assad does not originate in Syria itself. It's all being generated from outside that country. Otherwise, it would have stopped at the same time Syria's internet went down. A little kind of a failure to think these things through. Failure to get the word out there with their little online shill saying, look, Syria is supposed to be shut off, quit posting, quit posting. Didn't work here. Alrighty, let's see, moving right along here. Major development regarding Syria, and you have to read between the lines on this one. As you're probably aware, earlier in the week, Secretary of State John Kerry traveled to Moscow to have a meeting with Putin. Ostensibly, the official story was to talk about the Tsarnaev brothers and the links to Boston. Of course, we had it from other sources. John Kerry was going to Russia to basically tell them, stay out of Syria, just leave us alone, we're going to do our little thing, and you should not get involved. Well, Kerry did not achieve his ends, and the warning sign was that John Kerry was kept waiting for 3 whole hours for his meeting with Putin. And apparently during the meeting, Putin was just playing with his pencil and going through the motions. Very clear and unambiguous diplomatic signal right there and then. So when we come back from these commercials, further analysis about what happened in Moscow and how it portends for Syria and eventually Iran. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show, and we're talking about Secretary of State John Kerry's meeting with Vladimir Putin in Moscow. Original cover story is they were just going to talk about the Tsarnaev brothers and their links to the Boston bombing and so forth. Then, of course, it came out that Kerry was on his way to Moscow to try and talk them into sitting out an invasion of Syria. Because remember, Foreign Minister Lavrov had sent a very clear message to the United States of America through then Secretary of State Hillary Clinton, that if the United States invaded Syria and or Iran, Russia was committed to turning those nations into the new Vietnam and just keep on pouring in supplies and support and wear the United States down in a war of attrition that the United States lacks the resources to fight for any prolonged period of time. So Kerry's mission in Moscow was to get Vladimir Putin to say, all right, well, go ahead, we'll let you take Syria. No big deal, right? And Putin apparently put up a brick wall right in the way of the American war machine. Now, they came out of that meeting and they issued an announcement that the U.S. and Russia have agreed to encourage both sides in Syria to cease the fighting. It's one of these politically acceptable statements to make, and the Arab League is out there praising this U.S.-Russia deal to stop the fighting in Syria. It is not a U.S.-Russia deal. Russia said to the U.S., the fighting must stop. And Kerry has had to back down. And now they're trying to save face by making it look like this is what Kerry really wanted, and that's obviously not the case. If the United States wanted the fighting in Syria to stop, they would stop sending the guns and the money to the hired mercenary army. Now, I wish this was the end of it. We'd all say, oh, okay, the threat of a Syrian escalation is gone, and we can all relax and go back to our pending summertime activities, like shoveling out the snow from the driveway one more time. But unfortunately, as I've mentioned before, this program of dollarification across the globe is an all-or-nothing deal. The U.S. ultimate agenda with all of these wars of invasion is to force the world back onto Bretton Woods, that the dollar will be the global trade and reserve currency. And it doesn't work if it's only half the globe, because the rest of the world will simply go to those nations that aren't trading in the dollar, because when you have to go through the dollar first to conduct trade, the U.S. takes a piece of the action. That's the reason Bretton Woods was such a sweet deal for the United States of America. The United States automatically got wealth by trading the dollars back and forth, just pieces of ink and paper, and taking a piece of the action. Now, the world does not want to go back to Bretton Woods. More and more nations are doing currency exchanges directly between themselves without going through the dollar. And it represents lost revenue for the Federal Reserve, which is the broker of these dollars going back and forth ultimately. And the United States has gone too far down this path to reassert Bretton Woods on the globe to simply turn around and say, all right, wrong policy, we're going to turn around and go back, return to status quo ante. And so I think what we're going to see in the coming weeks is a ratcheting up of propaganda against Russia, demonization, those gosh darn Russians, they won't play the game by the rules we made up. And so we're going to see an escalation of tensions there, and unfortunately, sadly, the reality is, and history bears this out, in big mistake number 1 and big mistake number 2, the private central banks that are the authors of all of this predatory behavior on the planet are perfectly willing to see the United States go to war against Russia and China, potentially including nuclear weapons, in order to keep their little Ponzi scheme banking system as the model for the world's economy. And of course, their model is the public currency is not a public utility. The public currency is just another money-making scam for the bankers. And because Kerry was not able to get Moscow to back down over Syria, we're going to see more and more leading up to a confrontation with Russia and China directly, and that is something we really need to avoid at all costs here. Now, getting back into Syria, there's still this debate, name-calling going on between the United States and the United Nations over just who it was who used chemical weapons against the Syrian people. And even Haaretz reported back on March 24th that it was the jihadists who were behind the chemical attacks. And the UN is agreeing, but the new lie is, oh, it's Assad, he's using chemical weapons. And the United States government is saying, well, we simply do not accept the United Nations conclusion. And frankly, since it was not the United Nations who lied to us all about Saddam's weapons of mass destruction, his nuclear bombs, I think we have to give the United Nations the benefit of the doubt here. We know the United States government lies to us. They lied about Saddam's weapons of mass destruction. They lied about human-caused global warming. They lied about the state of unemployment and the economy. In fact, we could probably save ourselves a lot of time and trouble by simply keeping track of those few times when the government actually told us the truth about something, if anybody can come up with something like that. Evidence is surfacing, this was reported over at b4in.info, that the chemical weapons were smuggled through Turkey by the CIA to give to the hired mercenaries to use on Syrian civilians to blame on Assad. So that thing is coming apart. Now, interestingly enough, looking at the corporate media, Fox News is giving total coverage to the hearings into Benghazi. CNN and MSNBC, which are the other two channels I tend to look at on a regular basis, are pretty much, Benghazi hearings and a side thing, and they're all focused on the return of one of these three kidnapped women to her family. They've got cameras set up, the balloons are out, and they're just waiting for this girl to finally come home after 9.5 years. And they're using this to contentize America, to keep us not paying attention to what happened in Syria, to what happened in Moscow. And in this case, they're hoisting on their own petard, certainly in regard to the gun grabbers, because as more and more of this story comes out, it turns out that the neighbors around this house, where these women were being held captive for almost 10 years, called the police repeatedly. One of them had seen one of these women naked crawling on her hands and knees in the backyard of the house. They heard pounding on the doors. They noticed plastic bags taped over the windows so people couldn't look inside. They called the police. The police showed up, didn't go inside, didn't check anything out, walked away. This case in Ohio with these three women is the most recent in a long chain of reminders that the police cannot, do not, and will not save you from criminals. If just one of those girls had been carrying concealed, this horrible tragedy that has devastated their lives could have been avoided. Yes, they're probably going to get some kind of a movie deal out of it, but they've lost 10 years of their life. They're never going to get back. Now we, the people of the United States of America, under the Second Amendment and under common sense, have a right to keep and bear arms equal, if not superior, to those in the hands of the criminals. And the criminals appear to be getting military-style weapons direct from the U.S. government. You are paying for them through that fast and furious gun-running operation. And here's another case. This happened last weekend in Washington, D.C. Lady named Kathleen Burke. Man broke into her home. She was assaulted physically by the intruder. She tried to call 911 and kept getting a recorded message. We're sorry, all of our lines are busy right now. By the time she actually got to a 911 operator, her attacker had already gotten tired and left. That's the message for you. The gun grabbers are out there saying you can turn in your guns, the police will take care of you. No, they will not. And there have been all these court rulings reaffirming that the police do not actually have a duty to save you from violent criminals. You cannot sue them for failing to protect you. Let me just read a couple of the cases here. This is probably the most famous, Warren versus District of Columbia. This is the one about the three women sharing a townhouse, two women upstairs. Here, the woman downstairs being attacked and sexually assaulted. They call 911. Say, the police are on the way, police are on the way, police are on the way. Finally, it goes quiet downstairs. They figure the police are there. They walk down. They get captured by the attackers, forced to do sex acts and sex shows for them all night long, and finally the attackers leave. These three women sued the police for not showing up, and the court said, no, actually there is no relationship under the law where the police are obligated to come and help you. Another one, Castle Rock versus Gonzalez, where this woman who had a court-issued protective order against her ex-husband, and he was violating it, she kept calling the police. the husband wound up kidnapping and then killing their 3 daughters. She sued, and the court said, no, not really, don't have grounds to sue. The police don't really have an obligation to come and protect you. Davidson versus City of Westminster, guy who got stabbed in a laundromat under police surveillance. And it just goes on and on and on. The police are not going to come to save you. If they show up at all, it is after the crime is over. It is time to arm the American people against the criminals. That is the core of the gun debate. Not tyranny, not potential revolution. We, the American people, have a right to be safe in our homes. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about the implications of this case out of Ohio where these 3 girls were abducted nearly 10 years ago, kept prisoner in a house, raped. One of them now has a 6-year-old daughter of her, or 6-year-old child of her own. And the realization, this simply underscores the fact the police are not going to protect you from the criminals. You can't sue them when they don't. The courts have ruled repeatedly the police don't actually have an obligation to save you from criminals. They're too busy writing traffic tickets or something, spying on the Occupy movement. I got an email from somebody saying it's ridiculous to suggest these 3 girls should have been carrying concealed because 2 of them were minors. So what? Because they're below a certain age, it's preferable to let them get imprisoned and raped for 10 years? Let's lower the age for concealed carry. When I was a kid, it was normal to get your first gun at age 12. Reminds me of that old statement where gun control is the theory that a woman lying dead and raped and strangled with her own pantyhose in an alley is somehow preferable to that same woman explaining to the police how her attacker got shot. If kids are being attacked, let's arm the kids. Teach them gun safety and how serious it is, and let them carry guns. Kids carried guns when I was a kid. Admittedly, a long time ago. We're talking half a century. But it worked back then. When the town I lived in, we never had a school shooting. We didn't have any shooting. The entire time I lived there, there was only one shooting incident, which may have been an attempted suicide. And that was it, the one time. Now, little interesting story here. The gun grabbers are out there screaming about gun crime and gun violence and how it'll all be better if we all surrender our guns. The reality is that when you take away all of these promoted media events like Sandy Hook that are waved around to scare us all, the reality is gun crime in the United States of America is in decline. It is down from its peak in the middle of the 1990s. Gun killings are down, assaults are down, robberies and other crimes. This is government data. And most Americans aren't aware of it because the corporate media isn't reporting that. Because if gun crime is going down, people are going to say, well, then obviously banning guns, is not going to have anything to do with that. The reason gun crime is down is because more and more areas of the country are becoming gun-friendly. Like these towns in Georgia that have made it a law. You must have a gun in your home, and crime goes down. Now, one more little story before we take a phone call. There's a gentleman, Neil Heslin, who lost one of his sons at the Sandy Hook shooting, and he has been put all over the media and before Congress lobbying for gun bans, and maybe they should have picked a different poster child because apparently he is going to court on larceny and other charges, writing bad checks. 5 separate cases for larceny and fraud on the docket at the court. Not exactly the best spokesman for gun control in this country. Going to grab a phone call. Scott in Colorado. Aloha, Scott. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Steve in Colorado.
Steve in Colorado. I'm sorry, it's that mutant hamster again on the keyboard.
That's all right, Mike. You bring out such good points. I mean, I'm being honest with you. I think the crime is going up with cops, crime, abuse on people. I can't believe what. I mean, all you have to do is just type in YouTube, police abuse, or you just find all these things that are coming about. And that's my friend of mine sent me a site called peacefulstreets.com. I don't know if you know anything about that site and what happened in Austin, Texas, where there was police abuse going on there at some college, and then just a bystander started, videotaping, and then the cops just kind of like, push this guy and then arrest him and everybody else that was just trying to, and then the cops like, you messed with the effing wrong cop. I mean, this is, I mean, and not to discredit anything or go against what you believe, Mike, but this is why you got people like Kokesh going up against the big boys up there, because they feel that their laws are, I mean, we have no rights, so why do their laws mean anything? I mean, and it's like, this is what's going to happen, Mike. No matter how much we all try to say, look, we want peace and this and that, there's going to be a whole bunch of people eventually saying, you know what, nobody's getting arrested, this and that, and it's about the people taking charge. They're not doing anything.
Actually, no. What it's about is money. Remember how I've been saying where the medical industry does not want a healthy America because they can't make money off of them? The police departments do not want crime-free streets because then everybody's going to say, well, we can cut back the police department. We don't need all these big armored transports and these drones and all the rest of that. The police budgets are dependent on a public perception of crime, and this is why you're going to have police officers get called to a house where naked women are seen crawling around the backyard and they're screaming and pounding on the walls, and the cops are going to turn away. We went through that here where I live last summer. We had drug dealing activity on both sides of us. We called the cops repeatedly. They can't be bothered. The Secret Service was out here checking them out. They didn't make a case. They need for there to be crime in the streets to pay for all those pretty black and white cars and uniforms and all the shiny badges and buttons. Thank you for the call. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And as long as that last caller brought it up, I do want to go back and address the issue of Adam Kokesh and his planned march into Washington, D.C. with people carrying loaded firearms as a demonstration. I see this as a classic opportunity for the United States government to infiltrate Kokesh's group with agent provocateurs who will get inside Washington, D.C. and provoke some kind of a confrontation that will lead to gunfire, that will allow the government to say, oh, it's a national emergency, all of those gun nuts are dangerous and a clear and present danger, and they'll be off and running with finally getting rid of that Second Amendment. And I don't want to get into whether Adam Kokesh is or is not complicit in such a dastardly plot. He may just see this as a publicity stunt that's going to get his name in the newspapers, and it's certainly working. He's certainly getting a lot of attention because of this. Now, the new developments are the District of Columbia Metropolitan Police Department Chief Kathy Lanier is saying anybody who walks into Washington, D.C. from Virginia carrying a loaded gun will be arrested. And so they're already telling us there will be a confrontation between these people carrying these loaded guns and the police. It is just right for an agent provocateur to shoot a police officer and just get this whole cascade going. Remember, I've been saying this for months. The United States government doesn't know how to deal with Americans simply standing up and saying we're not going to be the wallet of last resort for Wall Street any longer. That was the message coming out of the Occupy movement. They didn't know how to deal with that. The only thing the U.S. federal government knows how to deal with is force. They're preparing for a violent uprising of the American people. They hope for it. They want it, because then they have their excuse to suspend the Constitution, declare martial law and a national emergency, and that will be the end of the Republic. We will be that grand dictatorship that George Bush was joking about. How much easier it would be if it was a dictatorship. Only a few months ago, we were seeing these trial balloons in the New York Times saying it's time to get rid of that Constitution. The federal government could operate much more efficiently if there wasn't all this darn civil liberties stuff to have to worry about. So we know that's the direction that they're going. And this Adam Kokesh march is like an engraved invitation for the federal government to come in and provoke an act of violence and gunfire in the streets of Washington, D.C., and it's an old stunt. As I've mentioned before, way back during the Vietnam War, the FBI, using their on-campus informants, organized this huge peace march to take place in front of the Disneyland theme park in Anaheim, California. That's what all the people who went along with this thought they were going to do, march up and down on Harbor Boulevard with signs. once they were there, the leaders of this protest, meaning the undercover FBI informants on the college campuses who had infiltrated the peace movement, led the protesters inside. They took over Tom Sawyer's Island. They were smoking dope there in full view of all of the park's customers. They caused property damage. National Guard shows up along with the press, and the next day it was headline news all across America. Those so-called peace activists were beating up on Mickey Mouse, and in a single PR stunt, destroyed the credibility of the anti-war movement, which allowed the Vietnam War to continue to the eventual loss of 60,000 American lives. And nobody knows how many Vietnamese were killed. And during the 1970s, during the hearings into COINTELPRO abuses by the FBI against the American people, it came out this whole staged riot was organized and carried out by the FBI on orders from the Nixon White House. This is how they change public opinion. And this Adam Kokesh march into Washington, D.C., whether Adam himself is complicit or not, it is going to be used to create an event that will allow the government to demonize those of us who support the Constitution of the United States of America, who support the Second Amendment, to call for a gun grab, even as it becomes more and more obvious that gun crime has actually gone down since 1990s, that SSRIs are the common factor in all of these mass shootings at movie theaters and schools, and the realization that the police aren't really going to protect you from crime. The police love crime. The more crime there is, the more tax money they get for all their little toys. The police don't want a crime-free area, because then they don't have a job any longer. They love crime. They love new laws. The more absurd, the better. We're going to go out and we're going to, get our paychecks here by enforcing the thou shalt not wear plaid on Tuesdays law. We know there's a lot of absurd laws in this country, and the police will enforce them because that's what they're paid to do. No laws, no crime, there's nothing for the police to do. And the taxpayers are going to say, let's start scaling these police departments down and save a few bucks. Put the money back in our schools. It's the same scam all over again. It's like the pharmaceutical companies don't want you to be healthy. If you're healthy, if you're cured of all diseases, they can't make money off of you. If there was really a crime-free city, the police department would lose their funding. The police love crime. They can't exist without it. And that is why so many criminals are simply overlooked, allowed back out on the streets to keep up that fear, to keep up that terror, to keep us pouring our money into these uniformed police departments who the courts repeatedly say don't actually have an obligation to protect us from violent crime. And that situation in Ohio underscores it. These 3 girls were held captive for almost 10 years, just 2 miles from where they lived. The neighbors were calling the cops and saying, we're seeing a naked woman on her hands and knees in the backyard. We're hearing pounding on the walls and screaming. And the police showed up, took a look, didn't go in, walked away. And that is the reality of the police force in this country. Now, I will concede, there are members of the police force who join the police force out of a sincere desire to serve their community. But the higher you go within the organization, the more and more it comes about getting funding and political support, and the realization that if you want bigger budgets for your police department, there has to be more crime visible to the public. It can't be the other way. So the leadership of the police become just as corrupted as the pharmaceutical company or the government, any other form of the government. It becomes corrupted. They're driven by the desire for more funding. What's going to get us more funding? More crime in the streets here. What's going to get TSA and Department of Homeland Security more funding? We need more acts of terror. And it becomes a self-feeding cycle. Now, speaking of violence that is used to justify bigger budgets for the Department of Homeland Security, it has now come out that Dzhokhar Tsarnaev did not actually shoot a Boston police officer. We now know he did not actually have any guns when he was hiding out in that boat. And it turns out the police officer who was shot by one of his other fellow officers. Why were they just shooting willy-nilly? Well, they thought they had a cop killer. because of that MIT cop who was shot in the head sitting in his car. And I think that was the Officer Tippett of the current scam. You've got two patsies you've set up to take the fall for a staged act of terror. You go out and kill a cop and say, oh, the terrorists did it. And that gets all the police officers ready to shoot first and ask questions later because they're dealing with a cop killer. And just as was the case with Lee Harvey Oswald, didn't get killed resisting arrest. Tamerlan did. According to witnesses, he was run over by a police SUV and then shot. Police went into this backyard and they shot this boat full of holes trying to get Zokar. With all the bullets they fired, they still didn't get him. And he surrendered, and he's still alive. I hope he stays that way. All right, let's move on here to the situation in Benghazi. And as I pointed out before, it's kind of interesting. Fox News is giving the hearings in Benghazi full coverage. CNN and MSNBC are not. So there's a political perceptual bias going on here. John Bolton is out there saying Benghazi could bring down the Obama administration. No, it is not going to happen. Obama's in his second term. He can't run for office ever again. We know this Congress will never impeach him. What this is all about is the GOP wanting to derail Hillary Clinton's plan to run in 2016. And that's why Fox News, which is tied in with the GOP establishment, is giving this thing mainstream coverage, and CNN and MSNBC, who lean the other way politically, are kind of treating it like it's a non-issue. Congress, of course, will wag their finger, do absolutely nothing as usual, and Obama will finish out his term in office, and Hillary will be selling her memoirs as her public life career comes to an end. And by the way, she's already made that deal. $25 million advance on a memoir in which she will reveal her disagreement over the killing of bin Laden, her real sexuality, and a couple of other things. And we know the killing of bin Laden was a hoax, and I'm not even interested in the other stories, especially her sexuality. I could care less. Book's going to be a waste of trees, but she gets her money up front. It's a payoff is what it is. Now, getting back to this Benghazi, there are some things that are coming out at these hearings. Basically a reaffirmation of what we reported before. All of the decisions, minute to minute to minute, were made at the highest levels, and the blame dropped on the underlings. Whistleblower has come forward to basically say that the rapid response force that was preparing to go from Tripoli to Benghazi were told to stand down. The White House wanted this incident to happen. Didn't work out the way they did, that they wanted it to. But what I think this was, and Congress will never go anywhere near this story. Last September, the beginning of the month, polls showed Mitt Romney just slightly ahead of Barack Obama. Obama had failed to gain any kind of traction with the killing of bin Laden, mostly because Americans understood that wasn't really bin Laden who got killed. There were those laughable, phony photos that were leaked out onto the Internet. Most Americans, because they're now getting their news from the independent media, know the real Osama bin Laden died in late 2001 of natural causes. Nobody got him. He just croaked. And so last September, start of last September, Obama needed a new publicity stunt to reassert his role as a leader and a dynamic leader who would deal with the crisis of terrorism. And so what I think happened is they sent a small covert action team to play at being Al-Qaeda, to attack the consulate, kidnap the ambassador, and hold him for a few days while the corporate media just built the story and built the story. Hostage crisis, will it be a new Iran? And then Obama would send in the SEAL team to rescue the ambassador. He would look like a hero because he didn't let the hostage crisis go on the way Jimmy Carter had. And he'd be a hero. And what I think happened is when the Libyans living around the consulate heard the gunfire, they just spontaneously said, let's join in, let's tear the flag off the flagpole. And this carefully orchestrated stage play, campaign tactic, turned into a wild free-for-all riot, and the ambassador got killed. And now everybody's trying to pull back and cover up for it. According to Jason Shabetz, witnesses to this Benghazi situation have come under intense pressure from the White House and the State Department. Basically saying that there's a campaign of intimidation to where some of these witnesses are absolutely terrified of losing their lives. So something is being hidden here. And, you know, the Democrats are saying the GOP is just grandstanding. The GOP is just saying, well, there's something here that we need to look at. And again, I don't think it has anything to do with Barack Obama. They want to get Hillary Clinton out of the 2016 race. Because if she gets into the race, she's going to be pretty much unbeatable. Even with all the baggage she's got going back to Jose Cabrera, the cocaine smuggler who was funding her husband's campaign. Big scandal, you know, Hillary Clinton in front of the White House Christmas tree posed with a known cocaine smuggler. And the Secret Service let him in. You can be a cocaine smuggler and a criminal, but as long as you're signing those big checks, Secret Service will pass you right in. And the GOP still won't admit to themselves the reason they lost in 2008 and the reason they lost in 2012 is they ignored the candidate the rank-and-file Republicans wanted, Ron Paul. They worked to railroad him out and offer up instead John McCain and then Mitt Romney. And most Republicans, I'm one of them, said, if you, the GOP, are not going to give us the candidate we want, we're going to stay home Election Day. And that's exactly what happened. And the GOP leadership, they're out there talking about, you know, projecting the message and targeting the wrong demographic, and they're basically just making up all these excuses because they don't want to admit that their model of we'll pick the candidate and we can rely on the Republican voters to vote the party line didn't work twice in a row. And they don't have anybody credible to run against Hillary Clinton in 2016, and so their only way of having a chance at recapturing the White House is to get Hillary Clinton out of the race now, and that's what these Benghazi hearings are really all about. To so tarnish Hillary with Benghazi that she's no longer viable as a candidate. And then the GOP will be running, I presume, against Joe Biden. And they think they can beat him. Now, interesting little story, and this gets back to this whole charade called law enforcement. There's a gentleman down in Mississippi by the name of Willie Jerome Manning. He's 44 years old. He was convicted and sentenced to death by lethal injection for the shooting of 2 Mississippi State University students back in 1992. He's scheduled to die tonight. The only physical evidence that tied this guy to the murder was a single hair, which the FBI initially said, oh, it's from an African American. That was the entire body of physical evidence to link this guy to the murder. The FBI has now come out and said their lab may have made a mistake and the hair really isn't from an African American man. And they have sent letters down to Mississippi saying you might want to hold off killing this guy. It may have been the wrong guy. So we're waiting to see whether the sentence is carried out or not. We know in the case of wrongful convictions, there's always a strong political motive to just go ahead and kill the guy before it becomes an embarrassment for the powers that be. James Earl Ray is a classic example. He was convinced to confess to the murder of Martin Luther King by his government-appointed attorney. In exchange for leniency, he didn't get the leniency, immediately recanted the confession, said, my lawyer told me to say it, and spent the rest of his life in prison trying to get a ballistics test on the rifle that was claimed to be his. Because there had been a ballistic test which proved the bullets that killed Martin Luther King did not come from James Earl Ray's rifle. The FBI said, oh, the rifle wasn't tested properly. James Earl Ray and his lawyer said, all right, let's retest it. Go through the proper procedure and retest, and the FBI just stalled until James Earl Ray died in prison. So I hope they'll do the right thing for this kid, for this man down in Mississippi. I would not be surprised if they just put him to death just to get the political embarrassment over. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and we're just getting word that apparently the jury has reached a verdict in the Jodi Arias case. It's going to be announced at 4:30 p.m. Eastern Time, which is about an hour and a half from now. And again, you know, big news, big condensation. It doesn't affect my life. I don't know Jodi or the guy she stabbed. Doesn't affect you. It's just more fluff and distraction away from the things that really do affect you, the economy and the continued rush to escalate World War III into a full-on conflict. Apparently, James Holmes is entering an insanity plea regarding his mass killing at the Aurora movie theater. Gee, you think? But this is a good thing because, again, it underscores the idea that these mass shootings are not the problem of the guns. It's a problem with people being a little bit crazy and possibly being on these mind-bending medications. I imagine Dzhokhar Tsarnaev is feeling very frustrated. If he'd done a mass shooting, he'd be off the hook. People blame the guns. All righty, we're going to take a phone call here. Jack Rabbit in Virginia. Aloha, Jack Rabbit. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Long time no talk. I just wanted to bring up a couple of points. Number one, this term cop killer. If cops' lives are so valuable, because the term implies that they're more valuable than another life, since a person that kills a cop has this special designation, cop killer.
Mm-hmm.
Well, then maybe they ought to get out of the law enforcement business. Let us defend our own lives.
I think it's a very good point. It's a very, very good point.
Another thing is this Adam Dope Cash thing that he's going to run up here to Washington with an armed mob. I mean, who in their right mind wants a gang of people with guns marching around anywhere? It's absurd. And the whole premise of it is he's going to go up and beg the federal government for their approval to defend ourselves. That's our own natural right. We don't need their approval.
No, we don't need their permission. That's what the Second Amendment is about. The government doesn't give us a right to keep and bear arms. The government is forced to recognize our right to keep and bear arms. And under the Supreme Court decision, United States versus Miller, the Supreme Court has ruled the Second Amendment is specifically talking about the same guns held by the standing army. So if the standing army has fully automatic or 3-round burst M16s, we, the people, have a constitutional right to own the same. And certainly that is going to discourage criminals from coming over and kidnapping our little kids, if we have those.
Exactly. So maybe if the powers that be that think they need to have all these weapons, they're so afraid for their lives and everything, they need to just lay down their arms, everybody just go home, and we'll be happy defending ourselves.
That's really the amazing thing. They want us to give up our guns, but they all have bodyguards. They have Secret Service. Dianne Feinstein carries concealed. They all have their guns. They think because they're special, they have a legitimate right to guns. Their right to guns is no greater or less than that of the American people, and that's really what it comes down to. All right, we got to take a break.
Thank you, Mike.
You got it, Jack Rabbit. Thank you for the call. Good points you made. We got to take a break for station identification. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the show here, and it just now occurs to me, this Adam Kokesh stunt of walking to Washington, D.C. with an armed mob into what we are already being told will be a confrontation with the Washington, D.C. police. It only works as a political stunt if the corporate media convinces America that Kokesh is supported by all of the gun nuts in America, all of the Second Amendment, all the Constitution support, those people who still support that Constitution. And the fastest way to pull the rug out from under this stunt is for Second Amendment advocates who realize this is just going to be a false flag stunt to disavow this armed march plan. And so I think what everybody ought to start doing is making up bumper stickers that say, I do not support Adam Kokesh, and stick them on your car and put them out there. I'll probably put one up at our online store. I will sell it at cost, no profit, so people can get it. If any of you out there are in a position to be making bumper stickers, just start making them, giving them away to everybody at the gun shows, because this is a staged setup to take away what's left of our gun rights. I absolutely guarantee it. We're going to go to the phones here. Malcolm in Austin. Aloha, Malcolm. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Mike. Sorry to change the subject. Today is Texas Israel Day. I did not get a chance to go to the protest because I had a final this morning. But my thing is I think there's something discriminatory here because South Korea has given more to the city of Austin than Israel ever has. I think that in terms of other countries, Israel has maybe contributed about as much as, say, that of Ethiopia or Paraguay to Texas. So I'm trying to figure out, why is there a Texas Israel Day?
Well, that's a very good question. I mean, Israel habitually takes money out of the United States of America, and they may send back a tiny fraction and say, oh, you should be grateful to that. But, you know, the Middle Eastern oil nations invest billions, if not trillions of dollars in the U.S. economy to build businesses and create jobs. And why are we not having a Texas Saudi Arabia Day in gratitude for all of that capital investment? This obsession with Israel is destroying our nation. Our government is completely corrupted by Israel. They operate this giant kickback scheme through AIPAC, where AIPAC will give money to people running for Congress on the promise that once they get into Congress, they'll vote more of the American taxpayers' money back to Israel. It's a giant kickback scam. And it's absolutely shameful. The American people have been forced to give to Israel more than 4 times the entire cost of the Apollo moon program. I don't think we're going to get a giant leap for mankind out of all this money. We're not even going to get Teflon or Velcro out of it.
By the way, the best hamburger joint in Austin is owned by a South Korean, believe it or not.
Okay, well, I'll take your word for that. I haven't been in Austin. Actually, I don't think I've ever been in Austin. I've been in Dallas and I've been in Houston. I don't think I ever made it up to Austin.
Okay. Anyway, best burger joint in Austin, Tex-Mex.
Okay, well, you got your free plug in there. We're going to let you go and go back to doing the news here. All right, I want to move on to the economy. Phone lines are open, 800-313-9443. And again, I think that bumper sticker, I do not support Adam Kokesh, will pull the rug right out from under this planned, staged PR stunt to take away our gun rights here. Getting over to the economy, we're now hearing that Ireland may be the next location for a savings account, haircut, or scalping, depending upon the severity of it. And again, they're going for the bank deposits over 100,000 euros because of the insurance on deposits limits. Doesn't make any point to take accounts under 100,000 euro because then you just have to put the money back into it. So they're going for the big savings depositors. Or they may just change the rules on what constitutes an insurable loss. We'll be right back after these words from our sponsors. We're talking about the economy, and we're talking about the economy specifically in Europe right now. There was an interesting article in The Guardian over in Great Britain with the headline, Mario Draghi and the ECB haven't saved the Eurozone. And they're finally starting to get it over there, because the article is basically focusing on what they call a touching belief in the ability and willingness of central banks to prevent investors suffering losses, which of course Cyprus and soon to be other countries have already put to the lie. And they're starting to get close to what's really going on here. The European Central Bank cannot save Europe. The European Central Bank could never save Europe. The European Central Bank, a private central bank issuing the public currency as a loan at interest by design, creates more debt than money with which to pay that debt. In other words, the European Central Bank is the reason Europe is in trouble. Every nation with one of these private central banks issuing the public currency as a loan at interest is in trouble. And there is nothing you can do to change that situation unless and until you stand up and say the central bank is the problem. The public currency needs to be a public utility managed by the government to serve commerce and the people. In 1913, a corrupt Congress and a corrupted president transformed the public currency from a public utility into a private money-making venture. And 100 years later, we can see what they have done to our once great nation. Because we're not the greatest nation on earth any longer by any stretch of the imagination. We have been strip mined. We've been looted of the productivity and wealth of the people. Productivity from the people has been disincentivized. Doesn't matter how hard you work, you don't get anything for it. It gets siphoned off by the banks and by the government. Why try and excel in a climate like that? Why try and do better in a climate like that? The harder you work, the richer they get. And we're starting to see the media kind of sort of hem and haw around the fringes of this thing. Because until they address that issue of the private central bank, pyramid Ponzi scheme, debt creation machine, nothing they do is going to change the situation. No amount of haircuts will save the situation. No amount of austerity will save the situation. It's all just actions carried out by politicians to make it look to the public like they're trying to solve the problem while they ignore the real cause of the problem. So like I said before, you can picture the European Union as a giant wooden boat with a seat for every one of the member nations. And there are 10 holes in the bottom of that boat, and there are only 9 corks. The holes represent the debt, the corks represent the available money. And everything they have done to date basically comes down to yanking a cork out of one hole and pounding it into another hole in full view of the press cameras, screaming, "I'm working on the problem." But the water still comes in, and the boat is still sinking. And it's going to sink. And so it's true what the Guardian is saying. The European Central Bank hasn't saved the Eurozone. It's the European Central Bank that destroyed the Eurozone. And the big mistake they made when starting up the European Union was they had a built-in self-destruct device in that ECB. If they had started the Eurozone with the same model that the United States was started with, government-issued value-based currency, the European Union would be in charge of the world by now, instead of the private central bankers. Here in the United States of America, ORIC has filed for bankruptcy protection. You've probably seen the commercials on TV. It's a vacuum cleaner manufacturer. It's based in Nashville. And they've had to file for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. So it's another American icon that is gone here. Now, beyond that, there are other very worrying indicators about the economy. And I know the corporate media is saying, "Oh, 15,000 Dow, everything is fine. Happy days are here again." And they're all that whole situation. The Baltic Dry Index, we've talked about that before. The Baltic Dry Index is one of the earliest indicators of manufacturing activity, because before this company can manufacture a washing machine or a car or the new personal electronic device, they have to order and ship in the raw materials from which these devices are made. And that volume of raw materials being shipped is the Baltic Dry Index, and it is still going down. What's really more interesting is that the FedEx Corporation is reporting a 31% decline in its third quarter earnings from last year. And that means people are sending things via FedEx less and less. We're seeing the same kind of drop in the Postal Service and UPS. We talk about people doing their shopping online because the shopping malls have really become kind of a joke. It's 50 stores filled with the exact same thing they think you want to buy this week. But even online shopping is in decline right now. And apparently there was an insider sale of 202,000 shares of FedEx by the company's president and CEO. He's cashing out. He knows business is going into a decline and the share values are going to drop. And that is a really good barometer of overall economic activity in the United States of America. When the companies that support online commerce are showing a slowdown. We know why the Dow is going through the roof. The Federal Reserve is simply creating all this brand new money, which they loan to the Wall Street firms at close to 0% interest. The Wall Street firms take it, they buy blocks of stock. That demand drives the prices up, but does not increase the value of the underlying companies. Then they sell out. They give the money back to the Federal Reserve with that almost zero interest, and they pocket the difference. And they're getting richer every single day. It's a classic pump and dump as a permanent matter of Wall Street fiscal policy. And all of this newly created money, I mean, if they were off just on their own little reservation playing this game, we wouldn't care. But all of that newly created money by the Federal Reserve, $85 billion a month and possibly more, we don't know. Because nobody's allowed to peek inside the Federal Reserve. It's a private company. Alan Greenspan is on video saying the Federal Reserve is not answerable to any federal government authority. And when they crank out that $85 billion a month or more, it takes real value and purchasing power away from the money you already worked for, have in your pocket, have in your savings account, have buried in the mayonnaise jar out by the pineapple plantation. It's just another way of covertly transferring real wealth from you to the bankers. That's what's propping up the stock market right now. And they're still waving it around like it's a banner that the economy must be doing great. And if you're going hungry and if you've lost your job and you're losing your home, somehow it's got to be your own fault. There is a public backlash that is building. BusinessInsider.com is reporting on apparently there is a movie that is coming out end of this week. And it's a revenge flick called Assault on Wall Street. And it starts with a security guard for an armored truck, blue-collar New Yorker, working hard, trying to support himself, and his wife. She's recovering from a serious illness. The insurance cancels payment. And this guy loses his life savings because his broker puts him into this very shady deal that the broker makes a ton of money on commissions, and the protagonist of our story loses his entire life savings and investments. And he goes on a revenge binge on Wall Street. That might just get me into a theater to see. Now, over in Germany, what is being called the Eurosceptic Party is rapidly gaining ground. They were officially started only a few weeks ago, but apparently it has struck a nerve, and more Germans are leaving Germany's established parties to join up with this Alternative for Germany, the AfD party, which is the anti-Euro party. And this party's entire platform is out of the Euro, back to the Deutschmark, and enough with this nonsense about slavery to the European Central Bank. Over in France, it looks like the French voters are getting fed up with Francois Hollande and his government. Austerity and corruption, it's a very, very toxic mix for any incumbency to have to be dealing with. And it looks like Holland will be out as of the next election. Now, meanwhile, getting down to the non-aligned movement, this is the group of nations that are not considered part of either the American or Russian power bloc, the non-aligned movement, are urging the United Nations to take action against Israel for these attacks on Syria. All of these bombing raids, the shellings, and all the rest of that going on. It's a good idea. We know it won't go anywhere because this will go to the Security Council, and the United States will say, veto, 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 we have to veto, we have to veto, or Israel will tell the world who really did 9/11, and that's a political embarrassment we could not survive. You think Benghazi was a mess-up? Oh, boy, here. Now, we were talking the other day about the conference promoting a nuclear-free Middle East, and what an absolute joke it was, because all of these Middle Eastern nations were there saying, yes, we would like a Middle East without nuclear weapons, and Israel was in there saying, we don't have nuclear weapons, we have nothing to give up, which everybody knows is a complete lie. And it ended with Egypt walking out and saying, this is a waste of time. And Egypt was absolutely right. The only nation that actually has nuclear weapons officially still denies them, will not allow inspections, will not give them up, and now there's a bit of a backlash from that. These other Arab states are saying it's time for them to abandon the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. So the U.S. has hoisted on its own petard on that one. Now the NPT is going to be null and void. Nuclear arms are going to be proliferating all over the place because they wouldn't hold Israel to account. We'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show here, and we're talking about the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and this recent failed conference towards a nuclear-free Middle East. Now, the Non-Proliferation Treaty was designed to prevent the proliferation of nuclear weapons. Basically, the nations that had the nuclear weapons got together and said, we're going to have this treaty where nobody else is allowed to get nuclear weapons. If you want nuclear technology, you can have it, but you have to have inspections to make sure you're not doing anything nasty with it. And that was what was supposed to be going on with that. And all the nations on Earth said, this is a really good idea. We saw what the United States did to Hiroshima and Nagasaki with nuclear weapons. We agree these are a bad thing. And there needs to be a safeguard to prevent these things from simply showing up willy-nilly across the globe. And many of the nations in the Middle East have signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty. Iran signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty. But there's a problem, because the United States' credibility regarding the Non-Proliferation Treaty has now been destroyed by Israel, which does have nuclear weapons, refuses IAEA inspections, refused multiple requests from the United Nations and the United States to sign the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and was caught trying to sell a clandestine nuclear weapon to South Africa, which is the very activity the Non-Proliferation Treaty is supposed to prevent. What Israel is doing is using the Non-Proliferation Treaty to create a market monopoly. They're the only ones out there with nuclear weapons to sell. They're not encumbered by the Non-Proliferation Treaty. They don't have to worry about inspections. You want a bomb, you come and you buy it from Israel. And the other nations that have signed the NNPT realize that's what's going on. And as long as the United States continues to scream about the Non-Proliferation Treaty with every country on earth, especially Iran, while turning a very blatant blind eye to Israel's nuclear arsenal, it's just destroyed the credibility of the United States and the NNPT. And so now these other nations that have signed the Non-Proliferation Treaty saying, well, if Israel is not going to be held to the restrictions on nuclear weapons, why should we go along with this? We're all going to start making nuclear bombs to sell for export. Of course, Israel doesn't want that. Competition will drive the profits down. But that's really what's going on. The United States, by enabling Israel's nuclear crimes, has destroyed the Non-Proliferation Treaty. And if that collapses, every nation on earth is going to start building bombs. They're not that difficult to build, especially the uranium bomb. It's just a pipe with two subcritical chunks of uranium at each end. Slap them together, it goes bang. There. Now you all know the secret of the uranium atomic bomb. And this is another case where the U.S. government, foreign policy, nuclear safeguards have all been scrapped as sacrifice to Israel's agenda to be the world's only one-stop shopping center for nuclear arms to places like South Africa. And there is reason to believe that North Korea did not actually build their first nuclear bombs, but that North Korea may have bought them from Israel, because the isotopic signature from North Korea's first nuclear bomb test matched that from this joint Israeli-South African nuclear test in the South Atlantic, the so-called Vela incident. We're going to go to the phones here. We've got Kyle in Pennsylvania. Aloha, Kyle. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Well, you stole my thunder talking about North Korea with the nuclear weapon. There's very strong evidence that their weapons came from Israel.
Yes.
But as far as the non-proliferation treaty, I really think that it doesn't do any good. I honestly feel that when it comes to nuclear weapons, that the genie is out of the bottle, and that the only way to truly get rid of any sort of nuclear threat is to have every country. I mean, I would be in favor of Iran having a nuclear weapon, because that's going to prevent people like the U.S. and Iran from using a nuclear weapon against them.
You mean U.S. and Israel? Yeah, that's the reason to have a nuclear weapon. To deter invasion, to deter attack. If every single nation on earth had a deployable nuclear weapon, that's going to be very, very hard to convince anybody to start a war, because the instant you cross that border into the other country, one of your major cities is going to disappear.
Well, and from what I understand, the suitcase nuke technology is now down to about, what, a 3-foot by 3-foot container? I mean, that is something that
not even that big. Not even that big. You can take the plutonium primary out of a multi-stage weapon. I mean, look how small the nuclear warheads are on the Tomahawk land attack nuclear missiles. They've gotten them down to a very, very small size.
Well, I mean, that's where I say that the genie is out of the bottle, and if you want to secure a non-nuclear Armageddon, just make sure that everybody has nukes, and then it is mutually assured destruction. And like you said, that would seriously deter anybody from starting wars.
I agree. The whole point of the NNPT was, we have nukes and can attack you. You don't have nukes and you can't attack us. That's basically the whole thing. Got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the call, Kyle. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And the corporate media on CNN and MSNBC, now they're on the Jodi Arias thing. It's another hour, almost an hour before the verdict is coming out, and this is now the total. They've already walked away from the Ohio girls. They're making a big deal about their coming home. Now they've got Jodi Arias, and they're reprising the case and all of that stuff. It's all contentization. And if you don't know what I mean by that, it refers to Gary Condit, who was apparently caught up in this affair with a lady named Chandra Levy in mid-2001. And what happened was, in spring of 2001, the U.S. government informed other governments around the world of the plan to invade Afghanistan in October of 2001. And, of course, 9/11 happened just in time to anger the American people into support for that war. But even though the foreign press was announcing in March and April that the U.S. was going to invade Afghanistan in October, the American media never mentioned that the war was already planned and in progress. We got all Gary Condit all the time. Were they having an affair? Did he kill her? Where did she go? And it was like non-stop saturation coverage, which is what we're seeing here with Jodi Arias. And that's why we call this attempt to take a story that does not affect our actual lives and just give it the full-blown media coverage. We call it Conditization. And that's where that term of craft came from. Now, interesting little story regarding Stephen Hawking. Arguably the most brilliant mind of the century. Although, obviously, I disagree with him about the Big Bang, but we'll cover that some other time. Over in Jerusalem, the Israeli government convened this grand global conference to which the world's great scientists were to be invited, and Stephen Hawking declined. And he basically said, I cannot support Israel because of their treatment of the Palestinians. And The Guardian reported this yesterday, and it was all over the place that Stephen Hawking was boycotting Netanyahu's presidential conference of scientists in Israel. And, of course, Israel was all upset about that. And then earlier today, Cambridge University issued their own statement saying that, in point of fact, Stephen Hawking was staying home for medical reasons. Had nothing to do with Israel, had nothing to do with the Palestinians. His doctor said he couldn't fly. And there's this idea that he's boycotting Israel because of the Palestinians. That's nonsense. That would be absurd. Whereupon Stephen Hawking's own office issued a statement saying, no, he is staying home to boycott Israel because of the treatment of the Palestinians, which I'm sure the Cambridge University spokesman is standing there with egg on their face. And it is a reminder of the undue influence Israel has in educational institutions, including Cambridge University. And if you go out and look at the stories reporting on Stephen Hawking staying home from this, the megaphonies are out there already just screeching. He's an anti-Semite. He's a Jew hater. They take away his tenure, take away his Sir Isaac Newton chair, and just drum him out of the university. We can't have people like this teaching our children about cosmology. And they're just in an uproar about this. And it is a good illustration of just how much that is being put out, even by the university's own press departments, is influenced by political considerations for Israel. And now Cambridge is looking hideously embarrassed. And it's panic time. Looking at those comments, the megaphonies are out there in force. And if you don't know what I mean by that, Megaphone is a computer system that Israel supporters run on their computer. It's a little instant messaging system. And anytime anybody sees anything that is critical of Israel, they'll post it to the little megaphone. It immediately pops up on the screens of all of the other Israeli supporters, and they know to go in there and pile on and just screech and cry about anti-Semitism and Hitler and Nazis to try and shout down the debate. When you see all that flood of pro-Israel propaganda in any one of these social media threads or blogs, it is not a genuine outpouring of ordinary people. It is a well-organized and financed propaganda machine. Now, getting back to Syria, we're starting to get some additional information out of Syria now that their internet is coming back online. It's still slow, a lot of packet loss. We still don't know exactly why it went down. But apparently, Assad's forces have captured a strategic town in southern Syria. They've taken it back from the hired mercenaries. Robert Fisk is out there saying, look, Assad is winning this thing. He's winning it militarily on his own soil against this hired mercenary army, and he's winning in the court of world opinion. And he's going further to say that the United States' support for Israel's attacks on Damascus is only damaging the United States still further. Nobody is going to buy that Israel had a legitimate reason to carry out an unprovoked attack against Damascus. And as I pointed out the other day, this idea that Israel had a right to attack Syria because Syria might be giving weapons to Israel's enemies is exactly the same rationale for Japan's attack on the Pearl Harbor. So what Obama is literally saying is now he seems to feel Japan had a legitimate reason to bomb Pearl Harbor because, after all, the United States was sending weapons and arms to China, to Dutch Indochina, and through the Lend-Lease Act was arming the enemies of the Axis alliance of which Japan was a part. So now the new spin is, yeah, it was okay, it was cool for Japan to attack Pearl Harbor. They have a legitimate grievance. Japan's rationale for attacking Pearl Harbor is exactly Israel's rationale for attacking Damascus. Now, despite his promises, President Barack Obama, without obtaining permission from Congress, is sending U.S. troops into Mali. And we know why Mali is all of a sudden a hot place. Remember back when Germany demanded their gold bullion back from the Bank of France and the New York Federal Reserve. And they got the stall. Bank of France said, it's going to take us about 5 years to get you your gold. New York Federal Reserve said something like 7 or 8 years. Then 1 week later, France invades Mali, which just happens to be the third largest gold-producing nation in Africa. And now Obama is sending the U.S. troops in there. Mali's been selling most of their gold to China because when they get currency from China, they can send it back and get manufactured goods. When you get currency from the United States of America, it's not really good for a whole heck of a lot of anything that the United States makes. So now we're into Mali. I've lost count of how many nations the U.S. government has invaded in their quest to reassert Bretton Woods on the entire world, to dollarize planet Earth for once and for good. Now, just when we think things were quieting down over in the Western Pacific, with North Korea having withdrawn their missiles and not, in fact, carried out that test launch, China is starting to get a little bit aggressive in their rhetoric. You know, there's already these disputed islands with Japan. China has upped the ante. Apparently, earlier today, China's top newspaper published a call for a review of Japan's sovereignty over the island of Okinawa, which of course is the location of major U.S. military bases doing power projection to that part of the world. Now, Okinawa has not always belonged to Japan. Japan invaded and conquered it a while back, repressed the people, took away their weapons, which is why the Okinawans used farm tools as weapons. That's where all the Okinawan martial arts with the sai, which is a potato digger, the nunchucks, which is a rice flail, those are all converted farm tools that they learned how to use. And, developed karate techniques to break through the samurai's armor. But it's not traditionally a part of Japan. And now China is saying, actually, that belongs to us too. So now they're ramping up the claims. Just all these world leaders think a war is their best solution right now. And it isn't here. Now, over in the United States Congress, the finest Congress that money can buy, and unfortunately it's mostly the Israeli and the Federal Reserve money that's buying it right now, John McCain, who never met a war he didn't like, Carl Levin, Lindsey Graham, notice it's all these Israel's cheering lobby out there, are talking about an update to the AUMF. Now, this was the bill passed 1 week after 9/11. The authorization for use of military force. This was supposed to be the president's authorization to go after the perpetrators of 9/11 in New York and Washington, D.C. Now, when President Bush sent his letter of transmittal to Congress, activating the authorization for the use of military force, he knowingly lied, because Iraq had nothing to do with 9/11. And as it turned out, Iraq was not in possession of weapons of mass destruction. And because President Bush lied to Congress, his use of the American military was a private little war, and the Bush family should replace the cost to the U.S. Treasury. If you catch a congressman taking a government plane on a private little trip, that congressman is made to reimburse the Treasury. And because Bush provably lied in his activating the authorization for the use of military force, to go into Iraq, the Bush family should reimburse the American Treasury. And don't worry, they got plenty of money. They can afford it, certainly far more than you can. But now this authorization for the use of military force has become very loosey-goosey. It's been used everywhere. Oh, we have this authorization for the use of military force, and it's been used to justify the detaining of innocent people, torture, Guantanamo. They're basically saying anybody who had anything to do with 9/11 is covered by the AUMF. That's not exactly true. And now they want to rewrite it to give it an even broader scope, where everything done by the federal government is somehow tied into 9/11 and the war on terror to increase the abuses. Now, maybe a coincidence and maybe not. The World Jewish Congress has passed a resolution calling for the global criminalization of Holocaust denial. So we have, every time you have Israel out there, spewing all these lies about the Muslims and saying, hey, we're covered by free speech. Pamela Geller, her offensive posters, they put them out there and people say, take them down. Pamela Geller says, oh no, I have freedom of speech, freedom of expression. I'm allowed to say whatever I want. And now they want to come in and say that anybody even daring to ask a question or actually look at the facts of the events of World War II should be criminally punished. Why are they resorting to courts of law and criminal justice? Is their orthodox tale of the Holocaust not able to stand examination on its own merits? Obviously not. Now, when I was young, I bought the official story about World War II and bad Germans and Nazis and the Holocaust, because that's what the schools were teaching us. What finally got me to ask questions about this was seeing the intense amounts of pressure brought to bear on anybody who questioned the official story. They were sent to jail. Their careers were ruined. They were banished from academia. Wow, what an overreaction. I mean, people who claim to have seen Bigfoot don't lose their jobs. People who claim to have been taken for a ride in an alien spaceship don't have their careers ruined. People just sort of smile and nod and say, well, that's them thing. But only in this one area is so much force brought to bear to enforce the orthodoxy. And that, to me, says they got something to hide. Ryan Dawson is joining us on the line on Skype here. Ryan, thank you for joining the show. What's going on?
Well, I was originally going to give you a comment about Japan and China, but now they're talking about Holocaust. I'll just say there, too, Ernst Sundal had his house firebombed. Not only was he thrown in jail, but his residency was burned.
Yes.
And the culprits were never caught. And I've never had any film censored more on YouTube than my film More Than Taboo, which is about questioning the 6 million figure.
Well, it's funny because just as I started talking about that story, my server just got hit with a denial of service attack.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
I mean, they can't stand it. And, David Cole's out of hiding now.
Yes, I saw that. I saw that.
So, he's seen the film. So we might have something together here soon. It won't be on YouTube, but we'll find
probably not. We'll find a maybe we'll host it on my server. I've got the bandwidth now. For those who don't understand,
can I say something real quick about China?
Real quick.
Real fast. Basically, Western media will find any tiny little protest in China and make it look a lot bigger than what it really is. Mm-hmm. And the same thing with South Korea, and that caused a sort of backlash reaction in Japan because they would see all the craziest people that don't really represent China whatsoever. Because you're talking about a place with 1 billion people, and they'd find protests with dozens and stuff. And that's how they got Abe in there, who's a right-wing lunatic. And, Yuki Yoshino Noda was very anti-U.S. based and very anti-Israel, and now we have Shinzo Abe in there. He's not a friend of Israel, but he is very pro-war. And so they kind of manufacture these stories to play up the Japanese protests and the Chinese protests to get reactions out of their, what I call, a Chick-fil-A parties in both countries. So they go and rally behind their right-wing idiots.
That's a good phrase to put on there. But like I was saying earlier, now that Putin threw a brick wall in front of the U.S. invasion of Syria, we can expect a ratcheting up of propaganda against Russia. The same is true of China. China's gold-backed yuan is a very attractive international currency compared to the dollar, and that's why we're starting to see demonization of China going on and on more and more. And this is just more of the same.
Well, absolutely, but China is its own bully too. I mean, it's not like they're good and the U.S. is bad. I mean,
No, I'm not saying that, but but my concern here is the very obvious banker motivations to this rush to war. Because hey, it worked the last 2 times. We'll trade 100 million human lives to restore the banking system to its previous scheming and scamming glory. And it looks like they're going to just do it again because it worked the last 2 times, and it's not their kids who are going to die.
Not going to work this time. I think Israel really shot themselves in the foot bombing Syria a few times. I mean, they just look like the odd couple up there with Israel and Al-Qaeda on the same side.
Well, Israel doesn't care. Israel is still used to the fact that certainly the American corporate media will always cover their backsides. And, the U.S. government is out there saying, oh, no, Assad had the chemical weapons. We believe them. And the rest of the world is, and again, that Robert Fisk article is a good illustration. By supporting Israel's attack on Syria, the U.S. government has destroyed its credibility even further. As if there's any of it.
Nobody's listening to corporate media anymore.
Well, that's true. That's true. Apparently CNBC's audience is at an 8-year low. And
CNN's stunt, their parking lot stunt.
Oh, yeah, they're faking a satellite feed, and both people are in the same parking lot, and they're just trying, we have a satellite link to this person. Apparently, Rush Limbaugh's audience is in decline. He's blaming women for it. Oh, man, it's just so much fun to see that stuff. We have to take a break for commercials.
I'll hear the music. I'll talk to you later.
All right, we'll catch you. Thanks a lot, Ryan. Talk to you soon. America, welcome back to the show. So we're talking about how the World Jewish Congress has passed a resolution calling for the global criminalization of Holocaust denial. By the way, nobody's denying that bad things happened in World War II. But there are some fine details that ought to be re-examined. And truth needs no law to defend it. Truth survives re-examination. Truth is unafraid of questions. Throughout history, from Galileo to Zundel, only lies and liars have had to resort to the courts of law to enforce adherence to the official dogma. We need to keep that in mind here. So we're getting into this very Orwellian thing. You may not ask questions about this, or you will go to prison. You will have your career destroyed. And so now we have this very interesting story. This is being reported over at the internetpost.net regarding pop singer Lauryn Hill, who is in trouble with the Internal Revenue Service. And as part of her court judgment, the judge has ordered her to undergo counseling to deal with her conspiracy theories. So that's the new thing the courts are... If you go into court and you have a view of the world that is at variance with the official legend, they will order you into counseling. The thought police have arrived. You're not allowed to question the legality or legitimacy of what the government does. That's bad thinking, and we cannot tolerate bad thinking, so the court will send you to counseling to deal with those conspiracy theories. Pretty absurd here. All right, going back to the phones, Peter in Los Angeles. Aloha, Peter. Welcome back to the show. What's on your mind? Peter, are you there? Oh, there you are.
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
I'm just kind of calling to kind of pile on what you and Ryan Dawson were talking about with the Israel-U.S. Al-Qaeda connection, MI6 as well, the Brits. And NATO, it's as you've been saying for years, Al-Qaeda it always has been, a tool of U.S. Intelligence and so on and so forth. But one of the great things that the free media can do against the corporate media right now is to hammer and acknowledge that the fact that we are now supplying millions, if not billions, of dollars worth of aid to Al-Qaeda, when even everybody in the United States, including my 10-year-old daughter, can remember when they couldn't say a paragraph without mentioning Al-Qaeda, 911,
yes,
911, Al-Qaeda. And now here we are supplying them big time. Did it also in Libya. Please, the whole thing is a joke, anyways. But now it's outright, and there are laws on the books that prohibit us. You know, you can't even have contact under the Patriot Act and NDAA and all that with, you know, you can't even know somebody.
Oh, that's only for the ordinary citizens. They don't want us talking to Al-Qaeda because we might realize they're a bunch of phonies and frauds like Adam Perlman and Joseph Cohen and Zachary Chesser, and that's why we can't be allowed to go near them. Just let the TV networks tell you how evil they are. Got to take a break for station identification. We'll be right back. So welcome back to the show here, and we seem to be getting into an era where governments are feeling a high degree of panic. All of those tricks and methods and tactics and propaganda that used to work in the 1950s and 1960s don't work any longer. The American people do not trust the government. They do not trust the corporate media. And the government and the corporate media are trying to figure out how can they get that back, and the short answer is you won't. You can spend 100 years earning the trust of the people, and it takes one stupid lie or act of betrayal to destroy it all, and it doesn't come back. Trust arrives on foot, but it departs on horseback. Now, interesting little story here. Lieutenant Colonel Jeffrey Krusinski. He's the man in charge of the U.S. Air Force effort to curb sexual assault in the military, and he's been arrested for sexual assault. Well, there's a man who takes his job seriously. There is a major problem with sexual assault in the military. For those of you who are thinking about enlisting, because there are no other jobs out there. And we're even seeing indications that the Army's method for dealing with the epidemic of sexual assault is to discourage people from reporting it, not to deal with the problem. And I think this gets back to this lieutenant colonel who just got arrested. He's obviously not serious about curbing sexual assault. He just didn't think he was going to get caught here. Now, speaking of sexual assault here, down in Orlando, the Pastor David Loveless, billed as one of the top 20 Christian televangelist leaders in the U.S., has had to resign from the Discovery Church in Orlando after it came out he'd been having an affair. Been married for 33 years, grabbing a little bit on the side here. He's apparently the third pastor of a major Orlando area church to resign within the past 6 months because they're grabbing a little on the side. I know they call them men of the cloth, but apparently the cloth is lingerie. Anyway. Up in Massachusetts, I think we talked about this before, a Massachusetts bishop has had to apologize after he was arrested for drunk driving following a hit and run on Rhode Island. And I get a lot of emails when I talk about the child molestation and these various other things. Why aren't you more forgiving? You know, now, well, here's the situation. These are people who go out and request money from their congregations to tell them about the imaginary playmate in the sky, and they're out there saying there is a moral code you must follow. And yet they themselves seem unable or unwilling to do so. It's a clear double standard. And if they really do represent some kind of a divine, supreme, moral authority, why do they themselves not follow it? Does the imaginary playmate not read the resumes of the people who are coming in to represent him? And I know there are good people in the church. We work with a lot of them over here with this Feeding the Hungry program. But there are a lot of con artists and outright sociopaths who hide the very blackest of hearts under the whitest of robes. And we need to sort of keep that in mind. It's just another means of controlling people. It's just another way to unearned riches. And you need to be as skeptical of the clergy as you now are of the politicians and the corporate media, because it's just a different variation on the same theme. Lying to the people to get their money and obedience. We'll be right back. America, welcome back to the show here. Dan is now in our control room taking care of business there. Phone lines are open, 800-313-9443, 800-313-9443. A couple of stories here. Of course, the corporate media is all about Jodi Arias. We're T-minus 26 minutes and blah, 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 whatever it is they're going to do for that whole situation. Now, Barack Obama, or the Obama administration, which is Barack Obama, let's be honest here, is apparently going to back an FBI plan that would require websites that receive a wiretap order to comply by building surveillance capabilities into their communication services. Fines for these companies that fail to add this capability would start at $25,000 a day. Little thing called the Fourth Amendment that they're ignoring here. The right to be secure in your personal communications, in your privacy, against unreasonable searches and seizures. Of course, the government's attitude is, well, it's all reasonable. You're all terrorists. You all question the Obama administration. You question the laws. You question the legitimacy of private central banking. It's reasonable for us to keep looking at everything that you're doing. And the reality is, anybody who's a real criminal or a real terrorist, if there is such a thing anymore, they're not going to be using the open media. They're not going to be using Facebook to send messages. The only ones using Facebook to send messages are the phony Al-Qaedas that are set up to fill the internet full of the messages that the corporate media can say, oh, over at Insight magazine they had the plan for the pressure cooker bomb thing that the Boston people had. But it is a complete violation of your constitutional right to privacy. And the government apparently doesn't care. They're not paying attention to the Constitution anymore. We were talking about that internet sales tax bill that passed the United States Senate. It is a violation of Article 1, Section 7 of the Constitution. Measures to raise revenue must originate in the House of Representatives. Now, in Florida last Friday, their legislature passed a bill that would prohibit a homeowner who loses a foreclosure case from recovering the property even if the bank's actions are later proven to be fraudulent. So that means if the bank takes your home through fraud and you find out it was through fraud, you cannot go back and take your home back from the bank. What is the thinking behind this kind of a law? Well, it's simple. Because of the collapse of the mortgage-backed security fraud, all of these banks and mortgage companies are struggling to remain solvent. That little monthly payment you are making is not enough to keep them in the black. They need the full value of homes on their balance sheet right now. And that was the reason for the foreclosure fraud, to simply take homes away from people under dubious circumstances and get them on the balance sheet so they can technically stay solvent. It's wealth confiscation. It's just like when Roosevelt confiscated all the gold from the American people to save the banks back in 1933. Only this is being done in a way to trick the homeowners into thinking it's their own fault they lost their homes. And the only reason for the Florida legislature to pass such a boneheaded act saying that if your home was taken by the bank through fraud, you cannot sue to recover, is to protect the banks, not the homeowners. Because there seems to be an article of faith within our entire governmental structure that banks and ink and paper tickets are more important than the American people. And fraud is just a reality of America's business mentality. And now we've got the Florida legislature saying, yeah, fraud is okay if they get away with it. It basically underscores the fact we have lost our republic. And we are living in a fascist economic dictatorship, because fascism is when financial corporate power and government power are aligned against the general population. That's not my definition. That comes from Benito Mussolini, who said fascism ought to be more properly called corporatism. And this bill from the Florida legislature is exactly along those lines. When the banks take your home through fraud and you find out, you're not allowed to do anything about it. Because that bank needs that house on their balance sheet more than you need a place to live in. Just go on down and rent someplace or live under a bridge or something like that. Just get out of our way. We're too busy saving the banks. I think the voters in Florida need to really take a good look at that legislature in the next election and say it may be time for a complete and total house cleaning. And I understand why that filmmaker made this revenge movie, Assault on Wall Street. It's coming out in limited release on Friday. A lot of Americans are feeling that way right now. And a lot of Americans understand that while the government may be complicit in what's going on, the author of all the misery, the author of all the wars, the author of the joblessness and homelessness and hunger and privation in this country goes right to the top of that private central bank issuing the public currency as a loan at interest. It's all about money. Over time, because the debt is always greater than the money supply, Americans are forced to become predatory against each other. Businesses have to cut corners to pay their bills. They have to put out cheap, shoddy, and dangerous products because they need to keep the sales going. And they'll try and duck responsibility for what they're doing. There was an interesting article over in activistpost.com. Death by prescription drugs is a growing problem. And you don't need me to tell you that. Just look at any of these glitzy commercials that are on the TV for the latest wonder drug. And that list of disclaimers at the end, only a few years ago, it was just, a couple of quick words about this drug may lead to this. Now that disclaimer of could cause this, could cause that is now taking up most of the commercial. The predations of the private central bank are turning the American people into predators against each other and the rest of the world. That model of private central banking is destroying the very best of our human nature in exchange for these paper tickets with colored ink all over them. Here's something you may not realize. More U.S. babies die on their first day of life than in 68 other countries. The United States has the highest first-day death rate in the industrialized world. Whether you call it Obamacare or HMOs or Wonder Pharmaceuticals or whatever, for all the money that is being sucked out of our society for this orthodox medical care, we are not a healthier people. In fact, our median lifespan is in decline. The age at which chronic health problems appear is getting younger and younger. Remember what I said before when we were talking about the relationship between crime and police? Police need crime to justify their budgets. The medical industry needs us to be sick because if we're all healthy, they can't make money off of us. And now we're finding out that the most innocent of all Americans, babies in the first day of life, are dying at a higher rate in the United States than any other nation in the industrialized world. Now, there's a little bit of good news out there. We have been talking about the Diagnostic and Symptoms Manual. This is put out by the American Psychiatric Association. And it's basically the book saying if your patient exhibits these symptoms, they have this illness for which there is this medication you should give them. And it's come under criticism in recent years because it's taking ordinary human behavior, the angst that we just go through because of modern life, and redefining them as a mental illness that requires costly treatment. And it's reached a point now where the National Institute for Mental Health is withdrawing support for the use of this manual. And part of the problem, of course, is there are no laboratory tests for psychiatric illnesses as defined in the DSM. It's merely a subjective opinion by the practitioner, who is obviously financially motivated to keep a patient in treatment, in therapy, and to keep shoving prescriptions at them. It's all driven by the money. Talk about money junkie nonsense. Nestle, remember we were talking about the Nestle CEO was out there saying that there is no natural right to a supply of water, that water should be privatized and commercialized for $1. So now we no longer have a public currency that's a public utility. Now they want the public water to cease being a public utility. And you will pay to some corporation to get you your bottles of water. And now Nestle is trying to patent a natural flour, the fennel flour. This is not a product that Nestle actually developed or created. They simply are trying to find a justification to patent it, so from then on, any products from the fennel flour belong to Nestle rather than the public domain. If they get away with this, it will be a disaster, because all kinds of things that are currently in the public domain will be snatched up and privatized. Anyway, when we come back from this commercial break, new announcement from Microsoft about Windows 8. They're trying to recover from what is one of the biggest disasters since Vista. We'll be right back. America, welcome back to the show. And of course, by now the world understands that Microsoft has fallen flat on its face with Windows 8. It was a ludicrous concept to begin with, the idea of a unified interface that would work on your desktop, your tablet, and your smartphone. Those are not identical devices, and obviously you want your desktop to have more capability than your little tiny smartphone. And it was a dumb concept. I couldn't believe when Microsoft went with that. It's turned out to be a complete unmitigated failure. And now Microsoft is pulling a new Coke turnaround. Remember when Coca-Cola changed the formula to New Coke, and everybody hated it, and then they came out and said it's Coke Classic, and they had to backpedal on that. So Microsoft is now announcing a Windows 8 rework. It's going to still be called Windows 8. They're going to call it Windows 8 Plus or Windows 8 Enhanced or whatever. And they're basically going to go back to the standard desktop interface that we all know and love. And a lot of people are asking the question, why are you even bothering? You have an operating system out there that everybody loves called XP. It's been around for a long time. They've managed to get most of the problems out of it. Why are you forcing us to buy a whole new, written from the ground up operating system that is shipped with 4,000 to 5,000 known bugs still in it? Well, because that's the business model, planned obsolescence. You will buy a new computer every 5 years. You will buy a new operating system every 5 years. You will buy updated versions of all of your applications every 5 years, because it's all about some money, 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 money. And in a healthy economy, you can get away with that. With planned obsolescence. People have the luxury of a surplus of cash where they can say, yeah, this laptop's 5 years old. I deserve a new laptop, and they'll run out and get it. But that doesn't work in an economy where people are pinching their pennies. And more industry observers are out there saying that Microsoft's smart move right now would be to do what Apple did. Settle on a single operating system and work to improve and enhance it and come up with new products that are going to make people's lives better, and not force a complete redo of everything every 5 years. It's one of the reasons why more and more people are leaving the Windows-based systems, and they're either going to Linux or to Apple. And it's becoming the point, it's worth it to spend the extra money to get a Macintosh computer and just pay that lump sum once, rather than buy a Windows machine and 5 years down the road, oh, you've got to update this and update that. Now, Windows migration just to Windows 7. I mean, after Vista's disaster, people said, we want XP, we're not going to go to Vista. Then they came out with Windows 7, which I helped a friend on a neighbor island put together a Windows 7-based system, and I didn't see anything at all to recommend it over XP. It was just a repackaging and new graphics to say, see, it's brand new. Aren't you glad that you spent $400 for this? Now, over in Japan, there are governments, agencies, that have made the decision they're going to stay with XP. And because official XP support from Microsoft is scheduled to stop next year, you will no longer get those security updates to keep the Viagra ads and the Israelis off of your computers. They're just going to solve the problem by disconnecting their network from the outside world. It'll be a completely standalone, insulated network running on XP, stable, nothing gets updated, nothing new gets put on, and it does the work it's supposed to do. And that seems like a really good solution. And we've reached this point in this country where corporate management isn't listening to the customers any longer. They're simply going with whatever they think is going to generate the maximum sales and maximum profit next year, and they're starting to stumble on these things. Windows 8 is a disaster by any reasonable definition. And, you know, the giveaway are the commercials. Have you seen the commercials for the tablet? I forget what it's actually called, what its trade name is. And they're very wonderfully produced, and they've got all these kids dancing and all in choreography, and they're just slapping these machines around and spinning them on their fingers and snapping the little keyboard on and off, all to the beat of this really rock music. And they don't actually show you anything about the machine itself. They're marketing it as a fashion accessory. You are not hip and trendy unless you have one of these things. And when you're talking about a piece of electronic equipment that's supposed to do work for you, and the commercials don't even look at that, that should be a red warning sign. When they're selling a computer as a fashion accessory, that's a warning sign. They're shoving something at you that's a piece of crud. Speaking of crowd, a lot of people have been very, very critical about Facebook, especially following its IPO, which was fraught with fraud and insider manipulation and money-making. Apparently, Facebook has lost 10 million U.S. users over this last year. People are starting to tune out. They're getting tired of the very blatant, overt attempts to extract money from them. They're tired of the ads. They're certainly very concerned about the fact that the U.S. government is trolling Facebook, looking for things that you ought not to be doing. And people are starting to say, you know something, I'm going to go back to the real world, and I'm going to talk to the people who live next door and down the street, and to heck with this Facebook thing. So Facebook's user base is starting to shrink rapidly. Going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. And, of course, 4:30 Eastern Time has come and gone. They still haven't read the Jodi Arias verdict. They're building the suspense. They're running it like it's a drama. They're trying to build the suspense and get everybody just, oh, what are they going to say? What are they going to say? I really don't care. I really don't care. I'm going to make a prediction because the verdict came in so fast. They're going to say not guilty. They're going to let her go. She's going to get a movie deal with Oprah Winfrey, and we'll never be rid of this here. Now, as Ryan Dawson was mentioning earlier, CNN got caught in a huge embarrassment when they were doing some of the coverage about the kidnapping of those girls up in Ohio, and they did a split screen between Nancy Grace and the other, I'm missing the name on the other person here. Ashley Banfield. And they had them split screen, and they built it as a satellite link between these two people. Very careful observers looking in the background saw the exact same cars driving by. It turned out CNN just had both these people in the same parking lot, and rather than just have them face-to-face on a single camera, they set up this whole fraud about a satellite link and show off how great our technology is, and it was a complete fraud. And it's just a reminder, the corporate media is going to lie about things even when there isn't a real reason to lie. It's just force of habit. It's amazing. Now, as I was also mentioning to Ryan Dawson, CNBC's viewership has plunged to an 8-year low. Now, of course, CNBC is geared toward business and financial news. But as more and more Americans get out of the investment market, and more Americans become aware that the financial media is no more honest than all of the other media and is there to support the various pump and dumps, they're starting to turn away from that. And one of the callers was referring to us as the free media. I think I like that better than independent media. We're the free media versus the corporate media. I'm going to start using that term. Now, a story out of freethoughtblog.com, Rush Limbaugh's network, the EIB network, has lost millions of dollars this past quarter. And he's in serious decline. A lot of his major stations have stopped carrying his show. His advertisers are leaving because of his declining audience numbers, and especially in response to his rants against Sandra Fluke. I mean, that was a turnoff to everybody. If I'd still been listening to his show, I probably would have quit at that point. And apparently Rush Limbaugh is out there saying that the problem are these media buyers who are young women fresh out of college and liberal feminists who hate conservatism. That's the reason that they're not getting the ad clients anymore. So Rush Limbaugh is not going to, maybe he's still on his meds or something. Maybe Pills is still doped up on whatever it was he was doped up on. But he's not willing to look at the fact that maybe his message is now out of sync with America. Oh no, it's these young women out of college and the liberal feminists, and it's a plot to get me off the air, and so forth and so on. I'll tell you something about people who work in advertising. Yes, they have political opinions. They really do. But the bottom line is reaching the maximum audience on a show that people are listening to get the message out there. Reach and repetition. And it's all about the final advertising client being happy with the sales that are being generated. And everything else is subordinate to that. And the fact is that Rush, again, he really hasn't changed his message all that much, and people are beginning to desensitize and tune out from it. And when he finally goes out of business, I want that golden microphone because this headset itches. Now, getting into this idea of constant total surveillance of you, probably you all remember the movie Minority Report and this idea that people walking through the shopping mall, their eyes were being scanned and targeted advertising was being directed at them. You know, hi, Mr. Chang, did you enjoy the whatever it was they bought the last time? Which at one point when the Tom Cruise character has swapped eyes with somebody else, it's a little bit of humor that the advertising is completely inappropriate for him. Well, we're not too far away from that. And not by the eyes, but Nordstrom is starting to use a system that will scan your cell phones as you walk through the store to see where you are going and what you are looking at. Now, they insist they're not getting the identity of the cell phone owner. They are merely trying to use the cell phones to establish the traffic patterns, because stores are very carefully laid out so that people in the stores will be driven past what are called the impulse buys. You'll usually see these things clustered around the escalators and the elevators, things that people may not have gone to the store to buy, but they'll look at and say, oh, that would be cool, I want that. That's the impulse buy. But it does show how much all of this smartphone technology is being used against us, because a lot of the layout of the store and its decor is designed by psychologists to stimulate us to spend more money than we otherwise might not want to do. Even the music in the store is designed to put us in a mental state where we are more susceptible to sales pitches. There's a lot of Skinner box technology in the design of a modern shopping mall and department store. And now they're going to start using the smartphone. And I'm sure while Nordstrom probably now is not using a system that extracts our identity, that's obviously going to happen somewhere down the road. And we've already seen proposals for kiosk ads, even down here in Honolulu, where your identity is scanned from your phone and targeted advertisements are put up as you walk down the street, which is going to be a real embarrassment for anybody who's used their smartphone to access adult entertainment sites. As you walk down Waikiki Boulevard and all the little LED screens next to you are showing naked women. It's going to be a little bit of a public embarrassment, I think. But we seem to have lost, not only has the government lost all respect for your privacy, but corporate America seems to feel it's not an issue. That they have a right to look into what you're buying and what you're reading about on the internet in order to send you targeted advertisements, and they think it's just part of the business. Now, because I run this website and do this radio show, I look at a lot of things that normally would not attract my attention. Tannerite, because of the story about that, I went over and I browsed their website. Well, probably by now, the Department of Homeland Security has a message that Michael Rivero on Oahu is looking at this explosive material on the Tannerite website. And yes, I did, but I don't have any intention of getting any, let alone using it to blow anything up. I was researching it for the story that we ran on whatreallyhappened.com about this particular material. And so it's not a reliable system for gathering intelligence, but I'm sure the department stores don't care about that. They just want general trends. What are you looking at? How much cookware do you look at? And so forth. Now then, we're talking about how death by prescription medicine is on the rise here in the United States of America. Apparently there's a bit of a scandal regarding the Glaxo flu vaccines, because over in the European Union there is a considerable body of evidence that children who received Glaxo's vaccine during swine flu pandemic were 14 times more likely to develop narcolepsy than children who did not get the vaccine. But the FDA is still moving ahead for approval here in the United States. We've got a caller on the line. You've been waiting for a while. Mike in Chicago, aloha, welcome to the show. Thank you for waiting. What's on your mind?
Hey, Michael. Yeah, I was mesmerized all day at the action on the Dow Industrial Average going to 15,100 right towards the end of the day. It's just for every point that Dow goes up, how many billions of dollars are we further into debt is what I'd like to know. With this, on top of this $85 billion that's never going to stop. It has nothing to do with employment. I mean, employment is a matter of who gave up looking. And then this Obamacare is going to throw another rock into the machine, because corporations are not going to pay any of those fines. They're just going to work. They're just going to get rid of everybody and hire everybody 30 hours a week.
Yeah, we've already seen that. We've already seen that here, even at our local restaurants. The people who used to be full-time employees are all gone. They've all been let go, and there are all these temp part-timers there. And of course, the quality of service and the quality of the food have gone down. And it's just another way of crushing down the entire society and country to make a fast buck for the insurance companies. It was not a well-thought-out policy. It was written by the insurance companies to make money. And nobody was thinking, what are the long-term effects in the wider society going to be? Nobody's maintaining that overview. Now, regarding the stock market, the problem with the soaring Dow is that even though this market churning and buying huge blocks are driving up the stock prices, it is not taking the underlying value of the stocks with it. The stock market is hideously overvalued because of all this plunge protection team and high-frequency trading games. And an overvalued market is a disaster waiting to happen. We saw the same thing in 1929. In August of that year, the stock market set a record, and all the financial pundits were saying, we've reached a permanent high plateau of the stock market. Happy days are here again. And then, of course, October, was the pail of cold water in the face. And the problem with an overvalued market is the instant there is a massive sell-off, and there will be sooner or later, when they can't keep pumping all this instantly created money in there. When there's a massive sell-off, only the first people to get out will get their money. Because then the stock market will fall down to the level where the underlying value of the stock will finally support the price. And all those people who are looking at their very impressive numbers on their stockbroker's report, that's all they're going to be left with. A very impressive looking number on a stockbroker report of how much they dreamed they were worth, but really weren't. The fact is, in an overvalued market, let me finish this thought. The fact is, in a market that's heavily overvalued, everybody can't get their money out. And that's the reality. A lot of people think they have a fortune invested in the stock market. They'll never get it back.
Right. Is this true that the multinationals and the regular, corporations that can borrow money from JP and all the other mega banks that get free money, essentially, could they just turn around and not loan money? Don't hire anybody and just buy back their own stocks with the money and then support their dividend holders? Michael, can you comment on that?
Yeah, they could very easily do that, and we know that going all the way back to TARP in 2008, when the American people were being looted to recapitalize the banks, we were told that we were going to have to recapitalize the banks so the banks could start loaning back to the American people again, and it didn't happen. And it was an absurd idea. The idea we're going to take $1 trillion from the American people and give it to the banks so the banks can loan it back to the American people at interest. Sweet deal for the banks, not so good for the American people. But it turned out most of these bankers took the money, wrote themselves huge, huge bonuses, put the money in their own pocket, and said, well, you know, the American people, they're without work and they're without credit. We can't go on lending to them the way that we were during the mortgage-backed security run-up. And so they basically took all this instantly, you know, this money that was taken from the American people, they put most of it in their own pockets. And because of all this ground zero lending rates, you know, it's not creating new jobs. What it's doing, it's allowing these businesses to invest cheaply in capital improvements, new offices, new facilities. They get brand new furniture in their office and everything at virtually no cost, but they're not generating jobs. And again, Obamacare is a major reason they're not creating new jobs, because it's huge costs involved in hiring somebody now.
Right. You know, they always look for the bubble in order to manipulate and screw the little guy, like they did with the mortgage-backed securities. And now, you know, we have nothing to do with this bubble on the street. There's no way, and we can't get loans. And I got one more question. Somebody asked me, well, what are you going to do with your Silver Eagle and your silver maple leaf ounce coin? You know, who's going to buy that from you? I mean, if you need the money. And I said, well, I understand that there is a market that's out there, and the price has come down very significantly, and it's actually hard to get Silver Eagles right now because of that. And so I believe, yes, there's a market out there. Somebody was asking me, you know, but can you comment on that, Mike?
Well, you know, part of the reason we're being told that silver and gold are dropping in price has to do with the fact that the price of physical and the price of those paper futures commodities contracts are blended together. And it is these paper contracts that are being oversold, and they can't make good on, can't make good on them. That's what's taking these the London gold and silver fix down. And during the real crush down a week or so ago, we began to see a major split open up between the physical prices and the paper prices. Gold and silver dealers were paying premiums to buy silver and gold physical, and they were certainly charging a premium to sell physical gold and silver. And you need to start treating them separately, even though the financial institution wants to blur them together, because if physical gold and silver were to break free and find its own price in the market, this whole game of trying to keep people in the stock market and money in the savings account would immediately implode. And that's why they're doing everything they can to keep these gold and silver prices down. It will go up eventually. Forget about day-to-day fluctuations. Look at the price, rather the value of silver and gold over the last few decades, and you will see it really is a sure investment, especially when you have a private central bank that is continuing to inflate the value out of the paper currency.
Exactly. Yes, I definitely. You know, it's a preservation of labor, capital, whatever you want to call it, wealth. You know, your wealth, it is. And people that are 30 years old, especially 20, should keep this in mind. Older people like yourself, Mike, I'm just kidding. You know, you're just speaking the truth right now.
That's what I do.
Okay.
That's why I make the little bucks.
Have a good day. Thank you for taking my call.
All right, you got it there. All righty. Well, apparently the verdict in Jodi Arias is in. She's guilty, 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 guilty. So I'm not going to cover that story any longer. It doesn't affect my life. It doesn't affect your life. We need to look at the things that really do affect your life, because that is the news. News is what affects your life. Everything else is fluff, advertising, and distraction. Now, over at Whole Foods, as the debate about GMO continues to rage, the CEO made a very kind of humorous observation, pointing out that Syria, ooh, those bad Syrians with their chemical weapons, they have laws regulating GMO products and mandatory labeling. Even Syria has it. U.S. doesn't. War for Monsanto? Maybe up next. We'll be right back. Erica, welcome back to the show. And, of course, the corporate media is still going on about Jodi Arias is guilty of first-degree murder. If I were her attorney And if she were on antidepressants, I would make a big stink about that during the penalty phase, because otherwise they're going to fry her. Now then, remember when ExxonMobil had that oil spill back in March in Mayflower, Arkansas, and they had a no-fly zone because they didn't want those embarrassing pictures to get out there? Apparently they've had another pipeline rupture up there in Missouri, in Ripley County, 200 miles north of Mayflower. So they're just leaks are springing out all over, and of course they're trying to sell that whole Keystone pipeline, and they got all these oil ruptures. That's something we're not seeing on the corporate media, this second pipeline rupture there. Did you read about where Mitt Romney, when he was giving a speech to graduating students, and his advice to them was, get married in your 20s and start having a quiver full of children. Have babies, lots of babies. I'm sorry, Mitt, in this economy, that's not really very good advice right now. I guess he just, breed us more soldiers, more workers, that's your job, get out there. Somebody just sent me this link to a story. Apparently we were talking about sexual assault in the military and warning our young people that, yeah, it's happening a lot. Apparently the Air Force actually put out a brochure recommending to young girls that their best course of action if they are sexually assaulted is to submit and just go along with it. Amazing, amazing stuff here. Alrighty, little email scam you need to be aware of. Apparently there's emails are going out that appear to be from PayPal or eBay, and you're being sent a notice that looks like a receipt from PayPal or eBay that you paid something like $200 for something. And then, of course, they give you a link to go in and get the details of the transaction. And people say, wait a minute, I didn't spend $189 on this fur sink or this electric dog polisher. And they click the link, and boom, you're infected with malware, and they're getting all of your Social Security numbers. And again, we have a government that does absolutely nothing about computer crime, because computer crime stimulates the economy. You will be encouraged to go out and buy computer security software and malware thing and all this other stuff. And as long as you're spending money on completely useless nonsense, we'll be happy because those companies selling you all that useless nonsense are paying taxes. There's a difference between stimulating the economy and advancing and growing your society. And when you reach a stage where everybody is working as hard as they can just to stay where they are, that's a nation that has already died and is looking for a place to fall down. All right, we have more about computer stuff. We'll take it into tomorrow. There's the music. Got to head on out of here and get some errands taken care of. I have to go buy a birthday present for my wife. And so we'll be back here tomorrow on the Republic Broadcasting Network. Until then, stay safe, stay well. Please make a point of reaching out to those of your fellow Americans who are starting to ask the important questions. Gently lead them to Republic Broadcasting and WhatReallyHappened.com, where they can learn the answers. They are out there. They are turning away from the corporate media. We need to invite them to the free media. Thank you, and aloha, America.